Okay. Jason won't be here today. He's got another commitment, which shocks me, but what are you gonna do? Let me relocate this. Yeah, like how could he want to do anything but be here, right? All right. So we're going to begin with, and Paul, also we're going through it aphorism by aphorism. So we're going to start with 60. Women and their action at a distance. And I'm at a bit of a disadvantage in terms of knowing what I highlighted because my Kindle is not in sync with the other Kindle versions that I have laying around, but I still have some notes anyway. I thought that the very first part of this almost suggests like um, the preferred stance in terms of being happy in the world is to be like a god standing over existence. And I think that's what the boat refers to, the ship, a large sailboat, um, to move over existence. That's it. That would be something. Well, the only thing that might move over existence would be God. So there's that suggestion in the very beginning. And then I think what he's saying is that, and before we get any further, let's just admit that this is coming from a very patriarchal point of view. So we just take that for granted out of the box. Okay. So feminism wasn't around. I'm not even sure women had any votes in 1882 anywhere. I suppose they did, but I don't know if they did or not. So that's sort of the approach that we're taking with this. So he's speaking from what was a conventional point of view at the time, and he's also speaking from a male point of view. So, um, hi Elena, you haven't been here before, right?
You're right. I have not. It's nice to meet everyone.
Oh, it's nice to meet you too. Okay, let me just say it real quickly again for your benefit. It's 1882. Did you read? I don't know if you read the landing page or not. We're going aphorism by aphorism. We don't know what he's going to be doing down the road. We're at more or less the beginning of his mature philosophy, and we're just going to take it aphorism by aphorism and absorb it, and we'll get to all that other stuff eventually. Any philosophers or commentary on Nietzsche after 1882, I don't want to hear it. We're anything before that he's referencing, so Schopenhauer or Hegel, Locke, fair game. You can bring any of that in. So I'm proposing that the first paragraph is sort of like how wonderful it would be to be like a god. And then I think he's suggesting that from a male point of view, um, a woman at first glance for most women seem, he didn't say gods, he said magical beings gliding past him, similar to the boat, and to long for their happiness and seclusion for themselves, men. And that's what men see in women. So I don't know if any of you want to, I hope somebody wants to comment on that because that's my 2 cents worth right now. I think there's a lot actually here. Um, the God thing may be an exaggeration, but I'm not sure. So, oh, and the deal is raise your virtual hand when you want to speak. So, and my usual thing here is, well, I guess you all agree with me. Okay, I don't see any hands up at all. Okie dokie. Well, boy, I got that one right. Oh, Barbara.
Well, you need someone to disagree, right?
Well,
I
or at
don't
least
dis Yeah,
say your own 2 cents worth.
right. Um, so this I thought was a little confusing. I think in general, it meant that men are immersed in, oh, worldly concerns, and it makes them feel like gods. Everything is demanding of them that they be almost like a hero, you know. Um, and then in the middle of that, there's this apparition, the sailing ship, and it's silent. And it says, when a man stands in the midst of his own noise, I have that one italicized, in the midst of his own surf of projects and plans, he is also likely to see gliding past him silent magical creatures whose happiness and seclusion he yearns for. So he's depicting a sort of a bifurcation in the way men's emotional lives are, maybe. On the one hand, they have to be like Jason and the Argonauts, and they have to win every battle. They have to be Achilles. They have to be somebody great. But on the other hand, what they want is this, they're drawn to this silence, this something that seems beyond that. And then he concludes by saying the most powerful effect of women is to speak the language of philosophers. So that's sort of the inner language, the silence, that people are sometimes drawn to if they're not distracted by all the froth. But I think he's comparing women not to philosophers or to philosophy. Oh, maybe he is. If he's comparing women to philosophy, then he's saying that what they represent in men's hearts is something higher than the everyday battle. Something. So it's not. It sounded misogynistic to me at first, and I see Fred's hand, so he's going to say it is.
Yeah.
But the more I think about it, the more I think, at least women here, they represent something that is inscrutable, and maybe a little bit higher and sweeter than the everyday sort of fray.
Yeah, the thing I got out of this at the very end is the magic and most powerful effect of women, which is this sort of departure from all the burdens that men are carrying, is in philosophical language, action at a distance. And I think that distance part sort of suggests that, but once you get close, geez, they're human just like everybody else. Just these, geez, they're just like men, only they're just women. Fred.
Um, yeah, I don't want to get into it here because, uh, well, I just don't. Um,
Don't want to get into what?
into Nietzsche's evident misogyny, uh, because
Okay.
because I'm just fascinated, always fascinated how if you're invested in Nietzsche or really anybody that we can, all of us can reconstrue anything to justify that fascination. But just to point out that um, the metaphor of the ship is like like uh, like Barbara said, it's kind of like Jason and the Argonauts, that here this it's this magical ship in the distance, I imagine, and in the mist and shroud, and it looks like there are magical creatures on it, and we yearn for the happiness and seclusion. But to parse that sentence, says the magic and most powerful effect of women is to speak the language of philosophers' action at a distance. um, there's a comma there, so it is not saying that the magic and most powerful effect of women is to speak the language of philosophers. Rather, subtract that clause, to speak the language of philosophers. And you get the same sense. Magic and most powerful effect of women is action at a distance. So men are impressed by women, but when they're kept at a distance from afar, because if you get too close to them, women are just full of this small petty noise. So if we keep our distance from women, Nietzsche's saying, then we can maintain this illusion of magical creatures that whose happiness and seclusion we yearn for. But we can retain that illusion only if we keep women at a distance and do not engage in their small petty noise. Now, I wonder how you read that differently than that.
Well, you're focusing on the petty noise part, and that could very well be what I was sort of suggesting. Also, I don't think the boat represents Jason and the Argonauts. This is a respite from Jason and the Argonauts, because he says here, then suddenly, as if born out of nothing, there appears before the gate of this hellish labyrinth a large sailboat gliding along as silently as a ghost. Oh, what ghostly beauty! How magically it touches me! Has all the calm and taciturnity of the world embarked on it? Does my happiness itself sit in this quiet place? That's not a call to action on the part of the boat. And I think it's that feeling of he even calls it a fantasy, that women at a distance represent that to men at the time. I think we can read our own definite, what I'm trying not to do is to read my own sense of what misogyny is today into what he's writing about here. I think he's expressing a genuine feeling that men have about women at a distance, and that, especially in that era, imagining them to be special kinds of beings that are not troubled by all the troubles of the world and all of the philosophical considerations that he is troubled by. And I think even today, men have that sense.
What comes to mind here in the illusion, given that it's Nietzsche and given the time, is the Flying Dutchman, the Wagner opera. That comes to mind here. That might be a more appropriate illusion than Jason and the Argonauts.
Yeah, that's not bad, because Flying Dutchman, he was familiar with Wagner. I'm pretty sure he'd written that already by this time. That was one of his early operas, which is a terrific opera, by the way. Anyway, all right, Mark.
Notion to Jason and the Argonauts, I think.
Yeah,
It's a ghostly apparition from afar.
that's good. Yeah, I like that. I like that. Mark.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to thank Fred for pointing out the comma, that to speak the language of philosophers, that clause separate. I think his interpretation, now that he's made it, seems pretty obvious to me. That he's just talking about a description of the powerful effect of women, which is merely action at a distance, not ascribing them the ability to speak the language of philosophers. So I appreciate that, because I didn't see that when I first read. I think that's clear. I generally tend to be sympathetic with Fred's viewpoint, although I don't have the same kind of emotive connection to it. Misogyny is, I think it's roughly accurate, but it's kind of a highly charged moralistic term, so I don't really think about it that way. I think he's very alienated from women, which I think was pretty common at that time, and still there's a lot of gender alienation still, so but more pronounced at that time. I don't think that's incompatible with what Lindsay is saying about the kind of idealization and mysticization of women. I think it's actually one and the same. Um, is that the tendency to put on a pedestal and to denigrate um, are like um, a kind of a romantic view of like a fantasy of what you expect a woman to be like. I think it's representative a lot in marriage. People have these very often very unrealistic, exaggerated ideas about what that relationship is going to be, and then once they get close and they're in it, they're like, "Oh my God, what did I do?" So the flip between the kind of idolatrization and denigration, to me, they're kind of part of the same process. So I don't really see that as being contradictory. I see them as being actually two sides of the same coin. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd use the word alienated. I think naive for is a word that I sort of prefer. He had a naive view of women because he didn't have many women in his life. Barbara.
You know, now that I look at this, he's linking up cause and effect. He's saying that um he identifies with the boat, and it says in my translation, it seems as though all the noise here has made me into a dreamer. So somehow he's saying that the life you immerse yourself in, the male sort of active life, um, causes you to reflect or brings you to another sensibility. Um, when a man stands in the midst of his own noise, that's when he sees the ship, and the ship in this case is women, so some idealized or internalized way of living. But also in my notes, it says something like the German term Nietzsche uses here means both dead and made immortal. So the quote is that his happier self, his second immortalized self, not yet to be dead, but also no longer alive. But that sounds like you go into a realm that is unchanging and immortal, at least according to the thing here. So the more I think that little snide comment about how women need distance that he makes at the end doesn't undercut really. It's just one of his snappy ways of closing out a paragraph, maybe. But what it seems to be saying here is that within you, and maybe even if you're really busy and really not thoughtful, something will bring that spirituality out of you.
Well, maybe he might be going there. I think part of what he's suggesting is that no matter what kind of state a lot of men might be in, if a he doesn't say pretty woman or beautiful woman, but if a beautiful woman shows up somewhere, the gaze is going to go to the woman, and all of that buzz in his head is going to suddenly be refocused, and that's where the fantasy part comes in. Then all kinds of imaginary faculties and capabilities will be sort of put on the woman, and the whatever you were buried in at the time is, I think it's just a sort of a description of the way a lot of men, I think men still feel this way at first glance. And that's maybe another way of saying at a distance. I don't know. All right. Nobody else? Okie dokie. All right. So moving on to 61. In honor of friendship And there was an earlier aphorism about friendship being even higher than love. Now here he's comparing it to pride. And I had to look up pride because pride is one of the seven deadly sins, right? And pride is just happiness and pleasure in your own accomplishments. It's not, that's the very first definition that popped up. And I thought, okay, I sort of get that. So you're really happy with yourself. And he's identifying this the self-sufficient sage. So the person, man, I'm sure he's thinking of here, is complete in himself. And that's the kind of pride he has. That it just doesn't, to me, it doesn't feel like an ugly thing. And the second most important, what is the phrase? The second most important, I think we did the feeling of friendship. The feeling of friendship is even higher and more meaningful than the feeling of pride. That's what he's saying here. Before it was love, now it's pride. So he's bringing that in as well. And this is just sort of like, it's a repetition of the earlier aphorism about friendship, celebrating friendship again, elevating it up to the highest feeling you can have as a feeling of friendship, which may say a lot more about Nietzsche than it does about human nature. So, do you all agree with me? That is my provocative thing, Elaine, just to let you know. It's because, any kind of discussion is like, totally okay, we can go anywhere, but if I've gone everywhere already, then I guess we'll move on. Yeah? Okay. So the next one, this I thought was really interesting. I think this is a very important psychological observation here because we've been considering Nietzsche as both a philosopher and a psychologist in the same way that Walter Kaufmann thought of him, and Freud, for that matter. And it's just love. Love forgives the lover, even his lust. And I think that the suggestion here, or at least the observation, is that fundamentally, having sex just objectively can be, kind of an expression of lust. And so what he's suggesting here, or saying outright, that the feeling of love disguises the feeling of lust that is expressed in that love. And the thought that occurred to me also along with this was that sexual intercourse is called making love if you're with somebody else. And so that covers over. All of a sudden, it's not intercourse, or it's not fornication. It's making love. And I think that is what he's commenting on. I don't know if he ever heard the expression. I don't know how common that would be. That's what I was thinking of. Do you all agree with me on that one? Oh, Barbara, your hand is up.
Well, so I hear what you're saying. Um, I I see the contrast here as love and lust, the way you do. But I also see that lust would objectify the partner, whereas love would be something more transcendent, it more able to do something like forgive the lover. So I think it's the idea that if you love someone, there is no distance, like he talked about in not the last one, but the one before that.
Yeah.
There's some distance, right, that he says is necessary. Um, I took it as to open up the spiritual side of somebody. But even if you just take it as, a woman herself, to love somebody, you can do things like forgive. And lust is something that no matter how, you have to be close enough to objectify the person. So you can't be, they're not a ship in the night. They're actually something less than that, I guess.
Less than what? I didn't hear the last part.
Less than that they're wait. That okay, let me put it this way then, maybe in every partnership between a man and a woman, or between any two people who love each other, there are two things active. One is the spiritual side, and one is the side where you can objectify the person and make them less than person. And so here he's talking about how if you have real love, then even if you have that tendency to want to objectify the person, the other person can forgive it if they love you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I kind of like the word objectify. I think that's a more modern kind of terminology about it. But I think that's a large part of that. Forgives even his lust. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Anybody else? Okie dokie. 63. Let me see what my notes are here. I think, okay, let me try to just, I think one of the things that he might be suggesting here is that women, women's feeling of love is different from men's feeling of love. And I think he's acknowledging, like in the previous aphorism that we just talked about, that it's more lustful for a man than it is for the woman. And the woman feels this warmth, the warm, rainy winds inspire a musical mood. I think this is talking about love for women is different than it is for men. For men, and there was a previous aphorism about possession, that love is possession. And it really kind of puts men on the spot because it characterizes love as an expression of possession. And that's not what this is saying. I think this is being kind to women and actually observant. So that's what I think this is all about, is giving women credit in a way, or just acknowledging that love for women is different, but there's a certain kind of rhetorical beauty that he's putting on it. Uh-oh, here comes Fred. Fire away, Fred.
No, that's I like your interpretation. For me, this was impressionistic, this whole thing, and very effectively so, because I live in rainy Portland, Oregon, and in the spring we get these warm, rainy winds. And boy, I'll tell you, when I wake up and it's warm and rainy, absolutely, I'm just driven. I got to put on some Mozart, to brighten up my day. And I thought this was just a really nice impressionistic aphorism. I don't entirely understand it, but don't really care. I just thought it made for a nice impression.
Well, okay then. Wow. I agree with you. I agree with you. There is an impressionistic sense to this. And yeah, okay. Anybody else? We're just blasting through these babies here. Okay. All right. 64 skeptics. My notes not helpful here, particularly. An older woman's opinion of virtue and profundity is a matter of decency and shame instead of granting virtue and profundity some real status. It's being denied. And I think that might be true at some level for older women. I know a lot of older women, and they're pretty sick of all that sort of virtue and profundity stuff for themselves. And it's because they're at a different stage in their lives. And a lot of it, especially if they're alone, can look like, this is just window dressing. That's all. And yeah, so I don't know where else to go with that. Barbara.
Yeah, this reminded me that he talked about how the appearance of something, and another aphorism, maybe it was last time, the appearance of something eventually becomes its essence. And so, in this case, the appearance of truth becomes something that eventually masks a kind of shame.
Yeah. The superficiality of existence. Yeah. It's sort of just well, it's called skepticism, isn't it? Yeah, skeptics. He might be speaking about more than just older women here with the idea of skepticism, because I've heard expressions like this more than once from older people, especially people that have been around the block.
Well, in this day and age too, you imagine older women are the people who end up mostly in church. So you picture a church full of older women, sort of practicing the rites, but not, and sort of happy to use that as a covering for what's really true in life. In other words, all their passions, all their sexuality. He doesn't say why you would do that. He just kind of says that I guess when you reach a certain point, it's desirable to have the appearance of goodness rather than its truth and essence, because that would be too difficult, too hard.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. Moving on. 65, devotion. This is a little bit of a play on the previous one too, I think. Yeah, this, I have a feeling that there's a lot of truth in this too, to be honest with you. That there are times when, and I'm a little confused by noble women, but maybe he's just using that as even the most respectable women are afflicted with us, who are. So he's being very specific here that virtue offer their virtue and shame. I think he's referring to sex, and they own nothing higher. So that's the poverty of the spirit. And so when they give it up, they expect it will be reciprocated in kind, and it's not. And I think that is why he's calling it a melancholy story, because they expected time after time after time. I'm a little frazzled over the noble woman. I'm not quite sure how to deal with that. Brad.
Yeah, I agree. And it is indeed a very melancholy story. I think of, say, Tess of the D'Urbervilles or any number of cases like this where women, young, impressionable women, come to feel that their greatest expression of love is that they supposedly sacrifice themselves, their virginity to the man in the expectation that he will reciprocate. And this is a great sacrifice for the girl, particularly back then, you know. Whereas for the guys, it's, you know, I love you, I love you. Oh, slam man, thank you, man. I'm out of here, you know, type of thing. Very melancholy indeed.
Yeah, yeah. This is a really profound observation, I think, that really hits the spot. I remember when I was young, and I think long before that, there was at least a fantasy that women were to preserve their virginity until marriage, until they got married. And there's all kinds of movies that are full of that expression made from back in those days. And so giving up that part of themselves was a really big deal. And for the men, it's like you said, it's like, yeah, okay, what's next? Now what? You know, Barbara.
Well, this kind of reminds me that it might be connected in a little way to some of the ones that we just looked at. For example, love forgives the beloved even his lust. So in this case, the woman
Mm.
who donates her virginity and then finds out that it wasn't worth doing, you could forgive that, especially if she really loved the man. But I'm more struck by number 64 because those old women now seem to me to be the enforcers of this idea that you express your deepest devotion by offering your sexuality. And it kind of says that same thing in 64, that now has become emblematic of whether you're a good person or not, or whether you're if you can mask your sexuality or transform it into something less dangerous, like virginity, you know, holding your virginity up as a model or something. Then it becomes just a matter of decency and shame and no more. So he is kind of, to me, you know, now he might not be misogynistic here, but he might be talking about how women sometimes enforce the toxic norms that you know, are to men's advantage.
Yeah, yeah. I like you tying that to 64. I think you're right about that. That's where a lot of that idea comes from. That sort of fundamental notion. I don't know. I'm my preferred word rather than misogyny is patriarchy, which I guess includes misogyny on the parts of some people, but in a lot of ways, the patriarchy just was the way things were. Women accepted it at the time as well. They may have been disgruntled in some ways, but they were part of this whole societal structure. And misogyny to me, as I mentioned last time we were together, just sort of implies a hatred of women. And I do not see that here. I just don't see a hatred of women at all.
Yeah,
I,
you know, you're right. And this reminds me of how in some cultures it'll be the women that enforce the idea of female circumcision, not the men. You know, yeah, and it's the same
yeah,
kind of thing, right? It's not so much that there's misogyny, it's just that there are conventions that have to be followed. And sometimes people forget the origin of it and just follow it kind of out the window.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Okay, so 66. Let me see what my notes are on that one. Oh, this I thought was really interesting too. I think this is a really, really fascinating observation, and I think this is at play in a lot of ways today also, that women are seen as, even as late as the 1980s, as fragile and trophy wife, that sort of thing was part of the culture back in the 70s, 60s, 50s, and going back. And that the women are part of this culture of flaunting weakness that they may not actually possess, because the last line of this is, thus they defend themselves against the strong and the law of the jungle, which I took to mean like the virility of the man, like the expression of it's men can beat their wives, and women couldn't even own property or anything back in the old days, and they could. There was a time not that long ago in the last century where a man could not be accused of raping his wife. And so this sense of fragility and softness and weakness is a defense against that, since that was what's on offer in a lot of ways. Not that every man is going to do this sort of thing, but culturally, this is an observation about women being the weaker sex. Barbara.
I happen to be reading, in a read aloud group, that when we're doing, what's that called? Streetcar Named Desire. And
Oh,
we,
oh my God, yeah.
and so the tension there is between this sort of caveman Stanley and Blanche, who assumes this vulnerability, this mask of vulnerability, this delicacy kind of. But the tension between them is that she's really just as strong as he is. It's just that her strength isn't legitimized. So you kind of see it here too, where he's saying that a lot of women will default to the weaker position in order to protect themselves.
I'm really glad that you were in that group and mentioned and thought of Streetcar Named Desire. I think that really works for a lot of these observations here as comparisons between the Stanley Kowalski type and the Blanche Dubois.
Dubois, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's that is really fascinating. That's the extremes of it all. But I think that's what he's addressing here, is exactly what that play is about. Sort of. I mean, it's about a lot more, but this is the strength of the weak.
Yeah, that's a great tie-in. I'm so weak and fragile. I depend on the kindness of strangers.
Yeah, 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 totally, totally. Oh my God. Wow. All right. 67, simulating oneself. So what did I write about that? Reflects on that as well. Let me see. Let me read this again. I had all this highlighted, and now it's not. When she just simulate, oh, okay. Now she loves him and looks ahead with quiet confidence, like a cow. That can be taken in a really negative way. He wrote, and well, Audrey isn't here, but she had suggested reading it, a thing called on truth and more on truth and in an extra moral sense, whatever it was, on truth and lies in an extra moral sense. The very opening. Oh, no, 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 I'm sorry. It's in the history, the uses and abuses of history for life. The very opening metaphor is that of a cow whose only existence is in the present. And it's not a negative, it's not a put down, it's not anything. It's just saying that a cow has no historicity. A cow is just, today is like today. Right now is, that's all there is in so many ways. So I've sort of established my credentials here already. I'm not going to accept this as a misogynistic put down, because I don't think the surrounding aphorisms would support that. So, um, And looks ahead with quiet confidence. Okay, I'm stumbling on this one. I know I had some thoughts about it. That's one of the interesting things that I really find here, that some of these things my head just spins in a way, because I there just seems to, many times there's so much there that I can't really focus on a single thing that it might be about. But this is kind of a put down of men, I think, rather than women. Of steady weather he found too much in himself. Wouldn't she do well to simulate her old character, to simulate a lack of love? Is this not the counsel of love? And then he says, long live the comedy. Because it is kind of a comedy. There's a real irony there in that, in this kind of relation between people who claim to be loving each other. Anyway, okay. Fred.
I don't see how calling women a cow is a put down of men, really.
Oh, no, not that part. The rest of them. The rest.
The rest of it. Yeah, the context can be here deceptive, and it leads into a logical trap. For example, to say that taken on their own, say, just speculating, taken on their own, aphorisms 1 through 10 may seem to be misogynistic, but they're not, because in context, all of them are not misogynistic. So therefore, any one of them that seems to be on its own misogynistic should not be considered that, because all the others we stipulate are not misogynistic. There's a logical fallacy there. I mean, taken on its own, it certainly seems. I won't go on about this. I just don't get it, how we justify his misogyny. And you're absolutely right. Misogyny is not the right word, but I don't have good enough vocabulary, I guess, to come up with the right term. And I think maybe what you say of naivete is perhaps more appropriate than misogyny, which is very much an overloaded word these days.
Yeah. That's sort of that's how I'm taking it. I'm taking it in a more modern context. There might be a gentler way of feeling that way. And Kaufman, I'm using the Kaufman translation, it actually says somewhere, I don't know if we're at that one yet or not, that, oh no, we're not. A lot of what Nietzsche has to say about women doesn't give him too much credit. And I think that really is more of a state of naivete. The only reason I would hesitate to use misogyny is because I think patriarchy is a better word to use, and he's just part of the existing patriarchy. Misogyny carries too much negative weight for me today. Mark.
But I'd say that patriarchy, blame it on that, doesn't carry enough weight, because we can't just pass it off as that. Because I mean, after all, we already have in this time, we already have some deep, profound women who are part of the patriarchy, who are far less shallow than Nietzsche portrays them. I mean, after all, George Eliot and Jane Austen and on, for that matter, any number of the women characters in Shakespeare show enormous agency and power, even in patriarchal societal structure.
Yeah. No, I won't even try to deny that. Mark.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to address Fred's comment about how he can't understand. Fred, correct me if I'm characterizing your attitude. If you think I'm mischaracterizing, how you have difficulty understanding how people can look at these texts on the face of them and not see misogyny. I don't have any difficulty understanding because people, in my experience, tend to think in morally dualistic terms. And so people who like Nietzsche, which is obviously most of the people here, or they wouldn't be here, tend to want to emphasize the things that they like about him and kind of uh, hide or obfuscate or avoid the things that they don't like because they want to see Nietzsche as good because a person's own interest in Nietzsche is to a certain extent a reflection of their own moral evaluation of themselves. So as somebody who's read like Stalin and Hitler and Friedman, Milton Friedman and Freud, and like a lot of different writers from a lot of different standpoints. Like to me, I'm the way that I think, and I feel like this is pretty different than what I observe. I'm not out to say somebody is good or bad. I don't care about that. I'm out to understand what they think and why. So for me, the dominant categories are cause and effect, not good and bad. So if one is trying to look at something in terms of good or bad, then whatever you're studying is a reflection of your own interests. So whether you see it as good or bad is a reflection of your self-conception of yourself morally. But there's another way of looking at it, which is studying it just to understand it, just to understand the cause and effect. And as one of my favorite sayings of Hegel, which I'm not paraphrasing, understanding is not judging, understanding is refraining. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, Barbara.
Well, before I make my comment, I just wanted to ask, are you really going to have a session on Christmas?
On what?
Christmas Day?
No, I'm not.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
we're
Yeah,
actually going to miss two sessions, which will be Christmas Day and New Year's Day, which is the following Wednesday. So they're both holidays just fall on Wednesday. So
right. But you have it in the, so that you have it in the schedule.
yeah, I'm going to take it off of that schedule. I took it off my calendar today. Yeah, I know. I need to do that. I need to do that. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, well, in that case, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. But to
Yeah.
get back to number 67, I'm thinking about this idea of misogyny and the word how loaded it is. It has a negative connotation. But what he really is talking about is appearance versus what's underneath. And he's talking about an idealized image that can fool you or that can draw you in. And that idealized image it looks good, right? But it's not really a good thing when you think about it because it covers up what the real truth would be. So it's kind of an esoteric veil over what the truth is. So there's a kind of a paradox there that something that looks that good and sounds that good and is esteemed to be good is actually not so good when you really look at it. And so I think rather than calling this misogyny, it might be better to focus on the idea of appearance and reality, or because even in Beyond Good and Evil, he starts out by saying philosophy is a woman. That's a previous. No, it's a no.
Okay. Okay.
I,
That's a spoiler.
oh, is it? Okay, I
Yeah.
don't know my dates very well.
He didn't write that yet.
He didn't write that yet.
No.
Okay, well then let's skip that. And then the other, the other idea, I just had a question. When you read the quote, it said to feign a lack of love. And in my translation, it says to feign lovelessness, lovelessness, which I took as something a little bit more comprehensive than a lack of love. I mean, a lack of love could, if you pretend not to love somebody, you could be flirting with them.
Mhm.
And that's what it sounds like in your translation. But here, lovelessness goes deeper to me. It's something like I'm not capable. So I know that we don't read it in the German to get the real flavor of it, but I wonder what the difference was there.
What I thought you were actually reading the Kaufman translation, but I guess that's Audrey. Which translation are you reading?
You got me. It's a PDF which I'm now it's so if I lose my place to find out who actually translated
Okay,
it,
okay. Did
yeah, I
you
don't want to flip through it.
did you download that Cambridge edition from that I have a link to on the website?
Probably.
So you're not actually in your like you're reading. Well, okay, so you don't know because the Cambridge edition is really pretty close to Kaufman. There's a few little things that change here, but some of the quotes you've been reading seem further off.
Oh,
So I would guess you're reading one of the older translations. If you
I
could,
would think I would have to look, see where I downloaded it from and have to go back and play around. I could do that
y-
later, but I don't have
yeah,
it right.
if you, we'll be more on the same page in a lot of ways if you download the Cambridge edition. That's most recent. Not, it's not the most recent. Well, maybe it was in the 2000s, somewhere in there that this was made. They had a whole series of books about classics in philosophy, and they retranslated all of Nietzsche's stuff.
You know
And
what? I probably didn't do that. Yeah, because it
yeah,
had it
because
page by page, and this was easier to scroll through. So
you might
yeah, I'll
you
have to
might
find out whose it is.
you might have to join academia. Don't let it worry you. You'll get an email occasionally, and you can probably unsubscribe from the emails, and it's free. And they have a whole vast library of stuff. And this happens to be, I couldn't believe that it was there, the that new edition. So it's just use the link that I've got on the web page and see if you would do that. It's not that you're wrong in that sense, but um yeah, it would make it a little easier because those two translations are more compatible. And I tend to trust Kaufman more, to be honest with you, than a lot of the other translators. That's a prejudice of my own. Hi, Jason. Um, you know, Fred.
I would say lack of love is a better translation here. I have lovelessness too, and I agree with Barbara that excuse me, that has a somewhat different connotation. But the following line there, Viva Cum Dea, seems to suggest lack of love. I'm thinking of the comedies, say of um, of Shakespeare, like Rosalind, is all about feigning love, and it's not lovelessness, I would say, but more lack of love and feigning it. In fact, and that's a staple of comedies, I think, from Greek times all the way up to the screwball comedies of the 30s, which we can't talk about. But
Yeah,
but
well,
but in other words, it's eternally part of comedy to feign that you don't say you don't love somebody when in fact you do, and to play that little game.
yeah, the it's okay to make references like that. I mean, we brought in Streetcar Named Desire, otherwise, those are modern illustrations, and if they help you, what I don't want is, well, so and so says that this is what Nietzsche means here. I don't want that. I want you to be giving me your thoughts, your opinions. You could have read all of those interpretations, but what I'd like to have is just your own interpretation. And I think we're sort of proceeding along that line for the most part. That could be my own fantasy, but it feels that way. All right. Okie dokie. So where are we now? 68. Simulating oneself. I was just reading the title of 67, Simulating Oneself. Huh, okay. Will and willingness. I think this is really interesting. This is the one where Kaufman has his note, I think. Nope, it's not. Okay, so my notes here on 68, youth never listens to wisdom. I know that's sort of a simple thing to say about this, but um, it is men. Oh, it is this part. Okay, the sage shook his head and smiled. It is men, said he, that corrupt women. and all the failings of women should be atoned by and improved in men. For it is man who creates for himself the image of woman, and woman forms herself according to this image. And Kaufman's got a note here, and this is developed in 71, a little bit further. I know that's further. We're not there yet. But I don't want to go there anyway. I'm sort of, the way I took this, and I've got a, well, I'm this, I'm a little afraid to say what I'm thinking. Um, it's partly the idea that in the sexual relations between men and women, it is usually the woman who will be the attractor. Attractee, I'm sorry, the attractee. Well, no, I've got that wrong. Women will be the ones who will be doing the attracting. And I think this is pretty obvious in a lot of ways. Just you can see the most disreputable looking guy, and he's got this gorgeous woman on his arm. And so women, and I don't think too many women these days want to even go here, which is why I'm sort of hesitant to do this. They do what he's saying here. They do that because they want to have the men in their lives. And so those women put makeup on, they do their hair, they wear pretty clothes, they dress to attract a man. That's what I mean by attractor. The attractee is the man who goes like, wow, look at that. Now, it may be all just a matter of culture, but it's the nature of the species in a way going all the way back to caveman days. The woman will be the one who chooses the man for the most part, unless she's raped and attacked, but she will give herself up to a man of her choosing, and she will make herself attractive to men. I think this is built in a lot of ways. And I think that is what he's observing here. I found this actually kind of shocking, a shock of recognition when I read this. Like, wow, man, that is really amazing. And at the very end, damn oil, damn kindness, someone else shouted out in the crowd, women need to be educated better. Men need to be educated better, said the sage, and beckoned to the youth to follow him. The youth, however, did not follow him. And I think that's a lot of what is going on today with modern feminism, that men have not been brought along, men have not been educated to be part of what's happening in the whole revolution in the culture. And they're denying it in a lot of ways. Fred.
Well, that's an interesting take that for Nietzsche, he is extolling men to be more feminist. That's odd. But setting that aside, two things I don't get in this. First, well, no, I just two things to note. First of all, I think it's odd. I don't know if it has anything to do with this, but it always puzzled me why humans are practically, if not completely, unique among the species on Earth, and that the typical pattern is that men attract the female. That the men are the ones who who put on displays to attract and the female. That's just odd. And secondly, what I don't get about this is that there's a line, maybe it's not in your translation, but there's a line here after they talk about women being doubly innocent. Who could have oil and mercy enough for them? Okay, mercy I get, but what the heck's the oil? I don't get that reference at all.
I don't know either. I don't know where to go with that either. Um, I just don't know. So I have no comment on that. Barbara.
Yeah, well, for once, I think that this is a little bit, we're not calling it misogynistic. We're calling it some other word that we haven't decided on yet, but the it the conversation such as it is, it starts out with it's men who corrupt women, and man makes for himself the image of woman, and then she shapes herself accordingly to it, as if she's compliant. And then in the end, it says you have to raise the men better. In other words, you have to train them, as you just said, raise their consciousness. But nowhere does it say that women could raise their own consciousness or separate out from this dynamic or this sort of dialectic that the two are in. It's always women who are pushed on and then have to transform. So I think in a way he's just assuming that no matter how much education or consciousness raising each side gets, the women are still going to be the ones who don't have enough intellectual or emotional or moral heft to change for themselves.
Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. So I want to dispute this idea that the dominant patriarchal social relations go back to caveman time. I think there is a tremendous amount of evidence that in pre-civilization, women had much higher status. Like if you compare the Tao Te Ching to the Analects of Confucius, if you compare the status of Mongolian women or Jurchen women in the Yuan and Qing dynasties to Chinese women, if you look at Malinowski's study of the Trobriand Islanders, if you look at Morgan's study of the Iroquois, if you look at the studies of the family naming conventions of the original Hawaiians and Polynesians, there's tremendous out. Oh, and I forgot about the Mosuo in China, whose matrilocal family organizational system survives to this day. There's tremendous evidence that in prehistory, women had much higher status than they did later, but most people don't know about it. So I think to me, the point that Fred made about how in many animals it's males that spend a lot of time attracting females rather than the other way around. Well, there's something very distinct about humans, which is that human social organization is based on the patriarchal family, which primarily means the passing of property and social privilege from father to son. And you cannot do that unless you assure female monogamy. And that requires an entire ideological social structure to enforce that monogamy of the woman to the patriarch. Without that structure, there's no way to have that patriarchal social and class structure, which is based around the passing of property and privilege from man to son. And in fact, I don't believe that existed in prehistory. That's it.
Okay. My take is a little bit different. I go back to the Paleolithic era. I think that agriculture and the advent of civilized life changed and did everything you're saying. And then it was a matter of culture where people adopted whatever the cultural issues might be as substitutes for the way people were living in hunter-gatherer societies. Life was shorter probably for Paleolithic people. And so being with one mate was probably not that unusual because life only lasted to be 30, 40 years old. I doubt that there were too many 100-year-old people back in the caveman days. And that's what I'm referring to. Women wanted to attract a man to be strong, and it was a very, very different world before you had armies to protect you. You had the man to guard the cave. This is an exaggeration. I'm blowing this up a little bit. But even in a tribal society, women were the ones who were going to be bearing a child, and women were the ones who probably, this is all speculation because, like you said, it's prehistory, um, were the ones who chose their mate. They would, because he was strong or whatever it was. There's a level of, there's a whole book that, and Darwin even acknowledged that sexual selection was different than survival of the fittest. And so sexual selection was marked in the human species by the woman attracting the man and making the choice herself. Mark. Mark.
Yeah, thanks. So I think you made a strong argument. It's a pretty common one that I've heard before. And I think one of the primary premises of it, which is uh, mistaken, is projecting the current nuclear family relations onto the past. Like I've heard, I don't know that this is exactly what you're saying, but I've heard this before. So you can correct me if this is not what you're saying. Like if you don't have a strong man to protect you, who's going to protect you without an army? But people didn't live in atomized families like that. They lived in tribes.
Yeah.
And like if you look at like the Seneca, for example, the man moved in with the mother of his wife, and that section of the longhouse was controlled by her. And if she was fed up with him, she took his belongings and set them outside the house, and he couldn't stay there anymore. Similar with the Mosuo in China. And if you look at family names amongst many ancient peoples, Hawaiians, ancient Chinese, etc., they tended to be matrilineal um, in the earliest societies, meaning that the society was organized more centered around women. All chiefs in the Seneca were also chosen by women. The chiefs themselves were men, but they were chosen by women. Um, so it's not like you have a man or you have no protection. No, you have the tribe to protect you, and the tribe is a social structure which in which women had much higher level of status and participation. That's it.
Okay. All right. I'm just focusing myself on the completely pre-agricultural revolution societies, which we really don't know that much about. Well, maybe we know more than I think people know. I'm presuming a lot just based on a couple of books that I've read, um, that I'm pretty close to what the likely truth of the matter is. And I'm sticking to it, even if I may turn out to be wrong someday. Jason.
I I would like to back to the title of this one, will and willingness, right?
Yeah.
So I think here I think he used woman as an example. So he's corrupted by woman, but actually the man corrupts the woman. So, and then next he talk about it is man who create for himself the image of woman, and the woman forms herself according to this image. So okay, so it's like double, right? So I work, forget about man and woman. I behave according to your expectation, but your expectation is based on your image of me. So I think that's the situation. Not only man and woman, and in many situations, parent, children, teacher, student, friend and a friend, they have a lot of things like this. So, and finally, he said, even I don't know what the oil means, but sounds like he talk about women need to be educated better, men need to be educated better. Stop living on the other people's expectation, or living according to other image. I think that's at least that's the essence I get from this chapter. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm starting to think here, will and willingness, and that comes up in the middle of it. Will is the manner of, and this is some, guy in the crowd. Will is the manner of man, willingness that of women. And then at the end, it's the sage and the youth. And the sage has the will to, and I may be misconstruing this, has the will to say men need to be educated better, beckoning the youth to follow him. But the youth, however, did not follow him. So I get this feeling that the youth did not have the willingness to listen and follow the sage advice of the elder. I think that's where it's really at here. Women are a vehicle. Well, there's a lot. It's like so many of these things. There's so many different ways you could go. But I think the title refers to the very end, will and willingness, and the unwillingness of the youth to pay attention to sage advice. Okay, we're going to stop here. And you guys will have to kill 10 minutes on your own. All right, next week we have an hour session. The week after that will be another hour and a half session. We're doing this every other week that way.
No, we are going to take off after next week.
No. Next week is going to be the 18th. Yes, you're right.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
right.
And
You're right.
after next
Yeah.
week, we are going to take off for 2 weeks. Yeah.
So we'll have a 1 hour session next week. I say December is going so slow compared to every other month of the year. It's just crawling. Okay, so we'll have a 1 hour session next week. I will post that within 5 minutes after we quit here, if you want to just keep an eye out for it in your email. And then we will be off for 2 weeks, Christmas and New Year's. And then we will be back with an hour and a half session, or an hour, well, whatever it'll be, in January. And golly, 2025.
Happy New Year.
I just don't know what to think about that. Hi, Celine. Oh, Celine left already. All right. All right, that's it for today. Thank you for being here. I hope you all come back, even if you didn't have anything to say. All right.
Okay.
Later. Bye.
Thanks.